Epochs! Going to sea was the most adventurous thing one could do, the Renaissance equivalent of becoming an astronaut, but the likelihood of death and disaster was far greater. These days, there are no undiscovered places on Earth. In the age of the global positioning system, no one need get lost. But in the age of discovery, more than half the world was unexplored, unmapped, and misunderstood by Europeans. Mariners feared they could literally sail over the edge of the world. They believed that sea monsters lurked in the briny depths, waiting to devour them, and when they crossed the equator, the ocean would boil and scald them to death. Some of the most tenacious ideas about the world at large derived from Pliny the Elder, who died in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. His multi-volume encyclopedia, Natural History, rediscovered and widely consulted in the Renaissance, sought to bring together everything that was known about the natural world: mountains, continents, flora and fauna. Pliny's chapters on humankind contained a potent mixture of fact and fantasy. He wrote of a tribe known as the Arimaspi, and this is Pliny now, a people known for having one eye in the middle of their forehead. He currently cited other classical authorities, such as Herodotus, who related tales of, quote, a continual battle between the Arimaspi and Griffins in the vicinity of the latter's mines. The Griffins had gold mines. The Griffin is a type of wild beast with wings, as is commonly reported, which digs gold out of tunnels. The Griffins guard the gold, and the Arimaspi try to seize it, each with remarkable greed. Pliny meant this vivid description literally, and while it might have generated some scepticism among naturalists of Magellan's time, it was generally accepted as fact, as was Pliny's curious description of forest dwellers who have their feet turned back behind their legs. They run with extraordinary speed and wander far and wide with the wild animals. India offered particularly fertile ground for extraordinary creatures. Pliny evoked men with dogs' heads who are covered with wild beast skins. They bark instead of speaking and live by hunting and fowling, for which they use their nails. At one time, says Pliny, over 120,000 of these hominids flourished throughout India. Pliny assured his readers that wonders never ceased in the natural world. The result of his labours was a Ripley's Believe It or Not catalogue tinged with the classics. That women have changed into men is not a myth, he wrote. We find in historical records that a girl at Cassinium became a boy before her parents' very eyes. To emphasise this point, Pliny claimed to have first-hand knowledge of the phenomenon. Pliny again. In Africa, I myself saw someone who became a man on his wedding day. End quote. There are more. He claimed that people in Eastern Europe had two sets of eyes, backward-facing heads, or no heads at all. In Africa, Pliny wrote, lived people who combined both sexes in one body, yet managed to reproduce. People who survived without eating, people with ears large enough to blanket their entire bodies, and people with equine feet. In India, he said, there were people with 6 hands. These marvellous accounts were subsequently retold by various respected chroniclers and widely credited up through Magellan's time. In the open waters of the ocean lurked even more bizarre creatures: whales and sharks, 6-foot-long lobsters, and 300-foot-long eels. Sailors had no way of telling which of Pliny's descriptions were reliable and which were fantasies. They were just as ignorant about major land masses. Only 3 continents were known to Europeans at the era: Europe, Asia, and Africa, although it was suspected that more would be discovered. The existence of an illusory island, Terra Australis, the Southland, was accepted as fact, and long before Magellan's voyage, this landmass was said to lurk in the southern hemisphere, where its vast size supposedly counterbalanced the continents in the northern hemisphere. Highly schematic medieval maps depicted the 3 known continents as separated by 2 rivers, the Nile and the Don, as well as the Mediterranean, all of them surrounded by the Great Ocean Sea, into which other seas and rivers flowed. This diagram resembles a T inside of an O, so medieval maps of this genre are referred to as T in O maps. To remain consistent with religious traditions, T and O maps located Jerusalem at dead centre, with paradise floating vaguely at the top. To complicate matters, Asia occupied the northern hemisphere of this map, with Europe and Africa sharing the southern. In some versions of the medieval map, the ocean sea flowed out into space. One could not navigate with such maps, or locate points on the compass on it, or plot realistic routes. They offered a conceptual model rather than an actual representation. As such, they were utterly useless to Magellan. End quote. So yeah, there are lots and lots of maps. I'm fascinated, as are most history nerds, by the history of maps and cartography. what the ancient people or medieval or pre-modern people, how they did their maps. The Mappamundi is a very famous one from the British Isles, and absolutely fascinated by them. But as Burgreen says there, they're not a modern map in the sense that you can actually use it, or certainly not in any accurate way to actually navigate and travel. I mean, in the vaguest sense, you can. You know, like the cities along a coastline will be in order, right? And the coastline, especially well-known coastlines, will be relatively kind of accurate. But as for knowing exactly where you are on the globe, you know, it's no good. They won't work. And that is exactly what people like Magellan and all navigators need. Okay, a few more details about a few more fantastical things they thought they might come into contact with. There's this idea of Prester John. Prester is sort of an archaic way of saying presbyter or priest. They thought that there was this person called, completely fictional, called Prester John, who lived way out in the Far East, in like China, Central Asia or China. And he was a Christian king, a great and powerful Christian king that one day might help them in their fight against the Muslims. And it was just a sort of comforting thought that there might be this super powerful king, like Kublai Khan or a Genghis Khan style powerful Christian king in the Far East, in the Orient. And if you could ever hook up with him or get to his court, it would be it would be a safe port and all that sort of thing. Of course, it was just wrong. It's just a misconception. There's also the idea of the fountain of youth. This was a big thing that a lot of people believed at that time, that somewhere there was this fountain of youth, and if you drank the waters, then you would become young again. So Burgreen tells us, in 1513, only 6 years before Magellan undertook his circumnavigation, Juan Ponce de Leon set out to find the fountain of youth. Peter the Martyr, another trusted authority of the Renaissance, described the fountain of youth as a spring of running water of such marvellous virtue that the water thereof, being drunk, perhaps with some diet, makes old men young again. According to tradition, the Fountain of Youth was located on the island of Bimini in the Bahamas. On the strength of his reputation as a soldier, nobleman, and participant in Columbus's second voyage to the New World, Ponce de Leon received a commission from King Ferdinand to claim Bimini for Spain. In a fruitless search, Ponce de Leon explored the Bahamas and Puerto Rico, but his failure to find the Fountain of Youth did not put the myth to rest. As late as 1601, the respected Spanish historian Antonio de Herrera Silias wrote confidently about the fountain's great efficacy in restoring youth and potency to young men. Although his quest seems fanciful and absurd today, Ponce de Leon was a man of his times. Superstition governed popular impressions and even scholarly accounts of the world at large. A work published in 1560 contained descriptions of various sea monsters infesting the oceans. One, known as the Whirlpool, was said to have a human countenance. Another, supposedly sighted in 1531, had hideous scaly skin. There were others, the Satyr of the Sea, the Rosmarus, which rivaled an elephant in size, and the wondrous Scolopendra and its face of flames. Voyagers across the sea, especially those attempting to circumnavigate the globe, could expect to encounter all these creatures and more in the course of their journey. End quote. So something to say is that even though they are still superstitious, and I don't necessarily mean that word as an outright pejorative, being ignorant, there's nothing necessarily wrong with being ignorant, right? I'm ignorant of knitting. I don't know how to knit, right? There's nothing wrong with not knowing something necessarily. And it's not your fault often if there's no way of knowing something. But still, they were, it is the right word, they were ignorant of the world at large in all sorts of senses, in all sorts of ways. But still, certainly the officers or the learned, the people that could read, would have read as much as they possibly could about these things. And a lot of them had already done a lot of travelling. Magellan had been out to the Indian Ocean. He'd been to India for years and years on end, remember? He'd spent 8 or 9 years out in India. So it's not like he was green. It was not like he'd never left Europe before or anything like that. And people that could read would read anything or everything they could of others that had done fantastic travels. Two of the biggest ones at the time were the accounts of Marco Polo, or his book was called The Travels of Marco Polo. And he's long before this period. I mean, that dates from the late 13th century, very, very early 14th century. So, a while ago now. And Marco Polo, whether he was a habitual liar or whether he did do all the things and see all the things that he said he did, one way or another, he certainly had travelled far and wide. Many people do question some of the things, or a lot of the things Marco Polo said. Still, it was one of the very, very few accounts that someone like Columbus or Magellan or da Gama would certainly have read. There was also The Travels of Sir John Mandeville, and I'll let Burgreen tell us a little bit about Mandeville. He says, quote, Sir John Mandeville served as the other great traveller and storyteller of the era. With suave assurance, he deftly mixed accounts from ancient authors with what he claimed were his personal experiences. But Mandeville was actually a compiler rather than a traveller, and he drew much of his material directly from Speculum Mundi, a medieval encyclopedia, which contained extracts from Pliny and Marco Polo, among other authorities. As a finishing touch, he wove long passages from the Pester John letters into his account and passed it off as his own work. Mandeville told jaw-dropping stories of his pilgrimages to the Holy Land, an unlikely event. He probably never got any further than a noble's well-stocked library. He claimed he traversed India, which he said was filled with yellow and green people, visited Prester John's kingdom without giving comprehensible directions, and even made it all the way to the borders of paradise, but failed to enter because he considered himself untrustworthy. He naturally claimed to have found the Fountain of Youth in the course of his travels, and imbibed 3 draughts of its life-giving waters. And these are his words, he's supposed to have said. And evermore since that time, I feel me the better and the wholer, end quote. So again, if your job is to actually travel the world, and to actually circumnavigate the globe, you're not probably, well, you won't be served all that well by the stories of Mandeville or Polo. I mean, some of them might help. There's certainly elements in Marco Polo which are true. But if you just want pure fact, pure reality, they're probably going to steer you further wrong than right. We hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please head over to lotuseaters.com for the full unabridged video.